Pay close attention. What you're about to see is Bible prophecy being fulfilled.
Welcome to another edition of YPN News, bringing you news as it relates to Bible prophecy and as it is foretold by Yeshua Hawkins. Well, displaced, stressed, and abused refugees in the news again. Hospice healthcare services only concerned about profits. Drugs that look like candy, targeting young people. And is incest becoming society's new normal? Well, that's just some of the disturbing stories that we'll be covering in today's broadcast. But we start off with the Syrian migrants along the Greek border and them being in the place that they're in right now in hopes of getting to a better place where they can actually settle. A Syrian mother, Maryam Mohammed, is very sorrowful because of the state of affairs that she and her family are in right now. She said in an interview, "I regret that we left Syria every day. It would have been better to die in Damascus. At least you know that you would have died in your own country and would have been buried in your country. But here, we're dying a slow death, our children and us." So it would have been better to actually stay in a war-torn country than to go to a place where the people are being treated so horribly.
That's terrible. War on one side and rejection on the other.
That's right.
Well, in that migrant camp, which also borders Macedonia, many try to make the best of their situation, while buses used to take migrants to an official reception center sits empty. In Piraeus, migrants are making some progress as they board buses, preparing to settle in Greece, while others will settle or will be sent rather to Turkey. Now, for many, it will be the uncertain future, one in which they hope for the best, but so far have experienced some of the worst conditions ever.
That's right. While some of those on the Greek border and elsewhere are beginning to settle in Greece and Turkey, others who are already in Europe are being sent home. About 200 so far, with more to follow. This comes as the result of a new deal between the European Union and Turkey. Migrants are bussed into the city of Lesbos, bound, their hands being bound, and they're also escorted with chaperones, each one, as they are put on a boat. Now this because the Greek authorities said none of the migrants had applied for asylum in Europe.
This while thousands of others are constantly risking their lives to cross from Turkey to Greece in boats that are very unfit for the sea as they flee from the war in Syria and Iraq. Now, refugee camps have now become detention centers. On the island of Chios, migrants frustrated with their treatment broke out of the detention camp and were actually took to the streets. Boris
Chichakov, spokesman for the United Nations Refugee Agency, said, "If someone is seeking asylum, it's not a crime." He fears that Europe's determination to stop the migrants could mean that some of them aren't being given the protection that they deserve. He also said they have to be given an individual process so that they can explain why they need to stay because they fear for their lives.
In Calais, France, over 75% of the refugees living in a camp known as the Jungle say they've experienced police violence. Now, that information, according to the Refugee Rights Data Project, of the 800 refugees interviewed, over 50% feared for their safety. 65% said they had to use blankets or burn garbage to keep warm, and 75% complained of health problems.
Yeah, I bet those camps aren't really a healthy
Unfit.
place to be. Yeah, that's right. Human rights groups criticize French governments for the camp's conditions, while French authorities have forcefully evicted people using tear gas, rubber bullets, and water cannons. So far, about 6,000 refugees are living in France, and Europe is struggling to cope with the biggest influx of refugees since World War II.
Well, Venezuela is experiencing a water crisis of their own. With water at an all-time low, the country is rationing water by shutting off water to the taps of many homes and businesses. Now, one man, Fernando Lozano, a resident of the city of Caracas, has been storing the water when it's on so he has enough water to get him through the periods when it's turned off. Now, the government is blaming a particularly long drought and the fact that one of the city's 3 reservoirs is empty. So the environmental minister gave the command for the water cuts.
That's right. Others say the problem stems from years of inadequate maintenance and a system that, when fully operating, falls short of demand. Mr. Lozano continued by saying, "I don't know who's right, but we the people are suffering. What we need are solutions," he said, solutions from the regional or national government or the city, whoever is responsible for this. The city's rationing of water could cause more protests on the streets, adding to the already frustrating situation there in Caracas due to a lack of necessary items growing shorter in availability.
The government hopes that the rationing will end by mid-September, but seasons are unreliable, so people like Fernando are preparing themselves to learn how to live without running water.
That's wise. Continuing with the effects of a widespread drought, over 6 million Ethiopian children face malnutrition due to food shortage as well as waterborne diseases. Currently, about 30 million people are affected by the drought in Ethiopia, and more than 1/3 of them are in need of emergency food assistance.
The country is urging the world to donate more food aid as the drought intensifies. Hundreds of thousands of people were killed in the African drought of the 1980s. And in fact, Hatan, this is the worst drought the nation has seen in the last 50 years.
Yeah, we're seeing that drought take its toll on more and more countries in many, many ways. Well, how would you feel if you spent the last 30 plus years of your life behind bars because of a bite mark? Only to find out that, well, you didn't have to spend one day in prison. One man just went through that exact thing and was released from prison, minus, of course, 30 years of his life. Well, take a look at what he had to say after his release at a press conference courtesy of WRIC.
The egos of those criminals, and I say criminals because I'm talking about the people in Newport News that had me convicted, detectives, prosecutors, judges, forensic scientists, they went out of their way to convict me. They weren't looking for the truth, they were looking for a conviction. Anytime I speak to anybody and tell them that my case was settled on bite mark evidence, they say, no, there's no way. Well, here's proof that it did happen. And we need to stop that. I'm not the criminal. The Attorney General's done said that. The Supreme Court said I'm not the criminal. The criminals are those people back in Newport News that fabricated this lie. That's the worst part about this, is my parents. It killed them. It devastated them. I mean, at the trial, I mean, like my brother said, he's never seen my father cry. It broke his heart. And they knew.
You're doing great.
And I'll never get that back. I couldn't go to their funeral because those criminals in Newport News. And somebody needs to pay for this.
Well, definitely a lot of lost time there that man is never going to be able to get back.
That's right.
Hospice care, a service provided for the terminally ill who's nearing the end of their lives. Now, their job is to keep the patient comfortable and treat their pain and symptoms of their illness until the patient dies. Well, not all hospice services are created equal. While some actually care about the lives and the sufferings of those they care for, others only care about eliminating the suffering of the loss of profits.
Wow. In a report by RT, they reported on a North Texas health care center called Novus Healthcare Services, a company that displays on their website saying that we treat people the way we would want to be treated themselves, and that they go the extra mile, they also said, to make patients feel comfortable and secure. Well, the FBI in an investigation has found that the owner, Brett Harris, has routinely instructed his nurses to give his hospice patients overdoses of drugs like morphine to speed up their deaths.
Wow. Well, oddly enough, the faster a hospice patient dies, the more money a hospice center can make. Harris allegedly sent text messages to his nurses telling them, "You need to make this patient go bye-bye," while instructing them to give 4 times the maximum medication allowed, according to the FBI.
Wow. It is also reported that Harris told his nurses to find patients that would die in 24 hours and also have nurses sign papers that needed a doctor's signature in which they would actually forge the name of a doctor and send that patient home to die even though they still needed that hospice care, all just to save money. Reason being, the longer people stay in hospice, well, the more it costs.
Medicaid and Medicare pays for hospice care, but has caps on how much money is given out. So if a patient lives longer than expected, it costs the hospice place money, sometimes even having to repay the government. Therefore, the way to make money in the hospice business is to find people who qualify for the Medicare and Medicaid and will die quickly. And that is just what Harris, and this, of course, according to the FBI, took place, even if he forced them, is what they're saying, to speed their death and, of course, get the money. So definitely no compassion there with that hospice place.
Yeah, that's a sad situation. Well, drugs of another kind are also causing concern this week. We have our correspondent Larry McGee tracking that, as well as several other important stories. Larry, what do you have for us?
Fears concerning narcotics in children is not just for big cities anymore. In small towns such as Ione, California, parents are being notified that methamphetamines have been discovered in the possession of certain children disguised as Smartie candies. Principal Bill Murray of Ione Junior High School says one student is reported to have taken the drugs himself before offering another student the option to participate. In offering a word of observation on the phenomenon, a parent and resident of Ione commented that in your worst nightmares, your children do drugs. The nightmare of Syria continues to grow more horrifying and intense after mercenaries were reported to have launched a chemical attack against Kurdish soldiers in the Syrian city of Aleppo. Footage is now surfacing showing victims gasping and attempting to recover following the attack, which is one of the latest in a string of hostile engagements between multiple groups, all vying to conquer and control Aleppo for its strategic importance. The events are being regarded as a violation of the ceasefire negotiated by the United States and Moscow. There is no negotiation, however, where many states are concerned on the controversial issue of mixed-gender restrooms and no let-up on the economic sanctions being imposed by certain elements of the American business community for those who dare not to support them. PayPal is the latest organization to cancel business plans in North Carolina, scrapping its plans to build a new facility offering 400 jobs due to a new state law prohibiting mixed-gender restrooms. 21 states, mostly southern, have all instituted similar legislation to support the religious views of business owners and allow them to decline services to those they deem morally offensive. Mississippi is thought to be running out front on the stance after passing its religious freedom law, which allows business and government personnel alike to deny services based on religious beliefs. The law applies to marriage licenses, jobs, and housing, and bars state government from intervening once religious beliefs are the reason provided. Mississippi Governor Phil Bryant signed it into law and stated for the record that he believes that it protects the religious freedom of those who have deeply held religious beliefs. So did the legislature, so did the majority of the people of Mississippi, and so they signed it into law. Companies such as Chevron, MGM Resorts, and Nissan all expressed criticism and stated that their policy is to prohibit discrimination of any type.
As opposed to the position taken up by other businessmen, Mitchell Moore, who owns Campbell's Bakery in downtown Jackson, says that if a gay couple walks into his bakery and asks for a wedding cake, he would sell it to them because that's what he does. He sells cakes. The registered Republican thinks the law is a big misstep and says that while he is Christian, he does not believe that Christianity tells them that he has to discriminate against people. He believes his job is to serve people, not turn them away. Despite the threat of economic exclusion, however, 8 more states are said to have similar legislation pending. The military is reeling from a personal blow this week after one of the 82,000 people at Lackland Medina Annex in San Antonio, Texas, opened fire and killed 2 people. Brig General Bob Lubruda says the incident was not terrorist related, but was simply an instance of someone going off. In other military news, Russian President Vladimir Putin says that America's failure to eliminate its holdings of weapons-grade plutonium is the reason why he declined participation in a recent nuclear summit. The Russian head is calling on the U.S. to keep their word, according to the U.S.-Russian agreement negotiated in early 2000 regarding weapons-grade plutonium. Over 50 heads of state were invited to the 2-day summit to discuss the acquisition of nuclear material and preventing ISIS from obtaining a nuclear weapon. Russia did in fact boycott the gathering as tension continues to mount between it and the U.S. For YPN News, I'm Larry McGee. Katan Jeff, back to you.
Well, that's definitely going to be hard to fix the relationship between the U.S. and Russia if we have people not keeping their word.
That's right.
Well, the World Health Organization has released its first ever global report on diabetes. The report shows how there has been a huge rise in diabetes since the 1980s. Now, diabetes is a chronic disease emerging when the patient's body does not produce enough insulin or cannot effectively use the insulin it produces.
That's right. There are now 422 million people suffering globally with the disease. That number has quadrupled in less than 40 years. According to the World Health Organization, in 2012 alone, diabetes caused 1.5 million deaths. Its complications are serious, often leading to heart attack, stroke, blindness, kidney failure, and lower limb amputation. The WHO has warned the disease has spread due to changes in the way people eat, move, and live.
In the past, the highest rates of diabetes were seen in developed countries. However, that trend has now changed, and in most cases, the increases are found in developing countries. Now, the UN Health Agency has also found that diabetes has become more common among men than women. And the WHO, the World Health Organization, warns that people must take action so this number does not continue to grow at such a rapid rate.
Well, if your child has had a fever recently, you might want to listen up, says KLBC News out of Lubbock. One pediatrician has seen several cases of hand, foot, and mouth disease already this spring. Michelle Jeffcoat, the mother of a healthy 1-year-old, had a terrible experience with it. Miss Jeffcoat told KLBC she noticed 2 bumps on her otherwise healthy 1-year-old's finger. Having worked at a daycare, she knew what it could be and that it in fact was the hand, foot, and mouth disease. So she looked at her toes and found more bumps.
While the baby did not get a very bad case of the virus, Michelle did. Now, after caring for her son, she broke out with blisters all over her hands and feet, which then spread to her face. Now, Jeffcoat said she was absolutely miserable.
I bet. Dr. Nal Zitoni, a pediatrician in Lubbock, says this is the time of year for a seasonal outbreak of hand, foot, and mouth disease. The disease typically occurs in toddlers, but no one is immune. The doctor warns it's highly contagious, and is passed through saliva.
And Catan, they give the very familiar scenario of the child who's drooling on a shopping cart and then it's not being wiped down. So then the next child sits in and comes in contact with that saliva, maybe even putting their fingers in their mouth or on the cart. And then after they touch the cart, it just continues to spread. Now, the doctor says daycares are also guilty of spreading it, since hand, foot, and mouth can live on a toy surface for several hours, and of course many children play with many different toys, and there it's very quickly spread.
Oh boy, that's pretty scary. Well, symptoms of the virus include fever, sore throat, blisters, and pain. And there is no medication currently to treat the virus. Doctors say it has to run its course, which lasts about a week. Michelle Jeffcoat wants other mothers to be careful, saying, wash your hands and sanitize your carts at Walmart, and make sure your kids aren't putting their mouths on things at restaurants. It's horrible, so really take care of yourselves.
Well, Shantae is a pregnant Asian elephant at the Houston Zoo, and she is due to give birth in April. Now, while the zoo is excited about the birth, they are also planning for the new calf to be the most monitored and tested calf that they've ever had at the Houston Zoo. Shantae is not a first-time mom, but in 2008, her calf named Mac, just in his second year of life, died of a herpes infection. And that is why Shantae's new calf will be so highly monitored.
Oh, that's sad. It occurs in Asian elephants. Several in U.S. zoos have died from the virus. Since Mac's death, the Houston Zoo and Baylor College of Medicine have teamed up to speed up the diagnosis time. Baylor, just blocks from the zoo, now tests samples from elephant trunk washings, blood, and eye secretions several times a week.
Already, Baylor's research indicates the virus may be spread among elephants through secretions from the trunk. Now, Baylor is monitoring the lab tests from the herd should there be a problem with an adult or newborn. Of course, they're trying to find it and identify it as quickly as possible to stop the death.
It's amazing that elephants are actually suffering this disease. Well, the National Zoo has also been studying elephant herpes for years, first described at the National Zoo by Laura Richmond in 1999 after one of their elephants died of the disease. In the last 5 years, as more cases have been identified, research has found that the elephant herpes virus is really at least 8 different viruses with many different subtypes, mutations.
Well, of those known elephant herpesviruses, some of them are quite different from the others. Some of the genes are so different that scientists were not able to pull them out of some of the viruses, commenting the genes are just too different. So you can see it's not just one, but many different herpes viruses, and some they're not even able to identify.
Sounds like it's far from the original genes that were supposed to be there. Well, Pope Francis has once again excited Catholics as he released a major document on sex, marriage, and family life this past week. His document demands that the Church shift emphasis from doctrine to mercy. In an exhortation entitled "The Joy of Love," the pontiff said Catholics should look to their own conscience rather than relying exclusively on church rules.
On the issue of contraception, Francis stressed that a couple's individual conscience should play a role. He also called for new language to help families cope with today's problems, saying that pastors must take into account mitigating factors in counseling Catholics who aren't perfect.
Now, the Pope says nobody can be condemned forever. The message continues Francis's efforts to broaden the Church's base of devotees.
Well, Father Robert Gall said many people were hoping that the Pope would somehow change doctrine, but Pope Francis understands himself as the Pope. He's Catholic. The Pope is very interested in families or couples who who never get married at all and couples who don't have children. And he sees this as a real problem in society, the demographic implosion of the need for this openness of generosity to life. Now, Katan, I don't know if you can understand that, but sometimes these fathers speak and it seems like it's so far reserved from any type of logic. It's kind of hard to understand what he's saying.
Yeah, very confusing. Well, continuing along these lines, incest. Yeah, some of you are probably cringing right now. Sexual relations between biological siblings or parents and children is now being considered totally normal. Yeah. In fact, the term incest is now preferably called genetic sexual attraction.
Trying to soften it down a little bit.
Trying to soften up the discuss there. GSA for short. A recent story of a Britain mother who is having sex with her biological son and planning to get married and have a baby has brought the subject from the back burner to the forefront.
Well, with much of society's focus on accepting people who are gay as being totally normal, this next step of accepting incest is gaining popularity. Supporters of GSA argue if two consenting adults want to engage in a sexual relationship together, then what's the problem? We're following the pattern that they have prescribed for society, that they have demanded that society follow.
So you see that those things that are considered normal in society kind of changes with the demands or the desires of the people within society. So basically, Jeff, they're saying if two consenting adults or two consenting adults, like a mother and the son, or in another case, a girl who's having sex with her father, her biological father, they're actually saying that now this is considered totally normal.
That's correct. And they're even taking it so far to say that if you think that their attraction is bizarre or as a result of some type of mental illness,
Sure.
You're the one discriminating against them.
Oh, amazing.
Well, Dr. Drew Pinsky, host of Dr. Drew, which explores the fundamental question, why we do what we do, serves as assistant clinical professor of psychiatry at the Keck USC School of Medicine. Dr. Drew interviewed two young ladies who were in a genetic sexual attraction relationship with their biological fathers.
Well, Dr. Drew asked Julie, one of the young ladies, to explain her story. She said, "My father and I reunited last year and we had a great reunion. It was very emotional. One of the key things that happened was we realized how much time had gone by since there was, and of course as a result of that realization, there was a lot of grief. And this sort of propelled us into this sort of intense hyper relationship where we were constantly communicating, constantly trying to find out more about each other. And the more we got to know, well, the more we realized how much we were connected," she said.
Well, Dr. Drew asked if there was a sexual component to their relationship. Julie replied, "Well, there wasn't at first. What happened was I actually said to my husband, I said, I feel the same feelings that I felt when I fell in love with you. I feel like I'm falling in love." And you could think, man, that the husband must have felt terrible hearing his own wife say that now she's having these feelings for a different man, much less her own father.
Yeah, normally you would think that, but Julie continued by explaining her husband actually understood what she was talking about, stating, "Because our daughters, 3 and 4, 3 or 4 years old at the time, they actually would express their desire to marry their father. They would come down in dresses and say, 'Daddy, marry me.' They have this heroic awe for their father, and so I never got to do that with my father, so I started to feel that, but I'm an adult, so I was really confused." And it sounds like there's a lot of confusion in the minds. Of course, they're talking to Dr. Drew, who deals with psychiatry, in the minds of these people who make these decisions, and of course, things kind of get out of hand.
Well, confused is right. As Pope Francis tells people to follow their conscience and don't worry about the rules of the Bible, mankind continues to lose their senses. Well, science has proven time and time again that what the Bible teaches is absolutely necessary for mankind to have healthy, joyful lives. Now, Yishra Hawkins has been the only one enlightening the scientific world for over 40 years now with the knowledge of the Holy Scriptures and how this guideline for mankind must be followed. Well, Pope Francis, you can have your defiled conscience and your who am I to judge attitude, but to our viewers, if you want to come out of this world and avoid the sicknesses and diseases that come with this lifestyle of illicit sexual relations that Pope Francis says is perfectly fine, then contact the House of Yahweh today and get to studying with the greatest teacher in the world, Yeshua Hawkins.
When you contact the House of Yahweh, don't forget to request your free copy of the monthly newsletter and the Prophetic Word magazine. To contact the House of Yahweh, you can write them at the House of Yahweh, P.O. Box 2498, Abilene, Texas 79604. You can call them at 1-800-613-9494 or visit them on any of their websites at www.yahweh.com, www.yeshrohawkins.com, www.yahwehsbranch.com, or also visit www.ypnnews.com. You can also email them at info@yahweh.com. And of course, all calls outside the United States, please call the number on your screen. And don't forget the latest and greatest study resource available on the internet today. You can visit www.yisraelsays.com.
Well, don't go anywhere. Up next is Yeshua Hawkins' response to Pope Francis's statement, "Let your conscience be your guide." Well, from all of us here at YPN News, I'm Jeffrey Heimerman.
And I'm Katan Alexander.
Thanks for watching.